We've basically restricted this input. Before, we could have newed up any kind of color cartridge we wanted, but now we've restricted it down to this finite set of cartridges that we've defined. Now with this, what we can do is we could do something special based on what cartridge was loaded into the printer. And for this example, we're just going to create a basic switch statement to kind of show you might want to do something more inside your class, and we'll get into kind of a more complicated example where we'll actually use the type inside of the class. But for now, let's just see basically how you could use an enumeration to do something in some logic here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a switch statement, and you can switch on an enumeration. So we'll go ahead and switch on printer.getCartridge. And getCartridge is going to return us our type. Remember, because if we look at this definition of getCartridge, you can see it returns T. And because in this case our T is color cartridge, it's going to return an enumeration because color cartridge is an enumeration. So using that, we can make our switch statement switch on the different cases. And if I hit Control Space here, you can see another advantage again of using enumeration. I can see immediately what my choices are for my case. So I can make the case blue. We'll do system.out.println, and then we'll print blue. And we'll do the same thing. We'll create cases for each of the other colors. For red, we'll print red. For green, we'll print green. And then we need to make sure that we've put break statements in our switch so that we don't end up hitting all of the code here. If you remember in Java, switch statements will break through or they will keep going. So now what we can do here is if we run this code, we should end up switching on what the cartridge is, and if it's blue, we'll print out blue. If it's red, we'll print out red, and so forth. So I'll go ahead and run this. And you can see that we got blue. And if we switch this code to, say, red, for instance, and run this, you can see we got red. So there's really two important things that we've done with this example. One is that we've restricted the input here. So we've made it so that this color cartridge has to be one of these types, red, blue, or green. That's made it a lot easier to use this method. A lot of APIs, if you're designing a class, it's nice to use enumerations because the person using that class knows exactly what you're expecting and what the choices are. And the second thing that we've been able to do here is we've been able to create some logic here that we don't even need a default statement. We know that when we call getCartridge, the only possible results in this case, because we've passed in a color cartridge, are blue, red, or green. There are no other possible results. And if we expanded this later, let's take a look at what would happen. So let's go ahead and go into our color cartridge, and let's add one more type. So let's add yellow. Now you can see how simple this is to add another cartridge. We just add this yellow here, and then we can go back into our case statement here, and we can choose the case. If it's yellow, then we will print out yellow. So this is a lot better than just having text here that you would pass in. Another way we could have done this is we could have had our cartridge just basically pass in the color in text. So we could have had it actually pass in red, blue, green, but that would be a lot harder to match on, especially if there was a typo somewhere in the code. By using this, we're making sure that these options are the only options that are possible. And it also makes it really easy because, like I said before, when we're trying to make this case statement, we can see, in fact, it auto-completes this as yellow when I hit Control Space because that's the only possible option that's left. So one thing that's really unique about enumerations in Java is that they are actually full functional classes. And a lot of people that have come from a C, C++, or even a C# background find this a little bit hard to believe and a little hard to understand why would they do this in Java. But once you start using this functionality, you'll find that enumerations in Java really, in my opinion, are the best, because having them be full-fledged classes really adds some convenience that you can't get when enumerations are just represented as integers. So I have a diagram here, and you can see here that we have a diagram of weekdays if we created a weekdays enumeration and what it would look like conceptually. And you can see that the weekdays enumeration that we created would inherit from basically an enum class. There's actually a class defined in Java that defines an enum. And then each weekday in that enumeration would actually inherit from the weekdays, or it's a type of weekdays. And so you would have your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and so on. But these are all classes, and I'm showing a class diagram here to kind of emphasize that point. And this is really, when you see an enumeration, this is what it looks like. In a lot of other programming languages, if you looked at an enumeration would really just be a way of seeing an integer, a way of naming an integer. And that's not the case in Java. You cannot cast a Java enumeration to an integer. So the enum class itself, it is kind of handy in Java. It gives us a values method that lets us iterate through all the enumerations. So any enumeration class that you declare in Java, you can call .values on it, and it will give you a iterable list of every value that's in that enumeration, which is really useful for going through and checking through an enumeration or mapping an enumeration to something else. Of course, an enumeration has constructor, or by default, you wouldn't even see the constructor, but you can add a constructor. And when you do that, you basically declare an enumeration and you pass in whatever parameters in that declaration of each enumeration in the enum type. It also can have members. And one really convenient thing that you can use an enumeration for in Java is the simple singleton. Now, it's not going to be a complicated application of a singleton. If you're familiar with the singleton pattern, it's basically a pattern that says you can only have one of a certain thing. But an enum class really works very nicely for this. You don't have to write guard clauses and all the code to implement a singleton. You can just declare an enumeration and use that as your singleton in Java.